So you are here hopefully to see some cool stuff about Domino 10 and the Proton task and Node.js and all of the war wounds that I have from building part of the app and our experiences from doing so.
And Tilo,
Where's Tilo?
it's time now to put your phone away. Thank you. Told you. Anyways, okay.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about? We'll start off by saying what we are going to talk about and specifically what we're not going to talk about, because honestly we could fill probably a whole day with stuff that we want to talk about. Explain what you can do with this stuff in Domino 10. We'll get right into a demo right away, and then actually explain what we did to build those demos, where the bits and pieces live, and talk a little bit about what we get now that we didn't have before. As I say, explain some of the war wounds that we got from going through this exercise, and then we'll share some resources for you as well. Just quickly, C3UG, you can see our wonderful logos here. This is the Cross-Canada Collaboration User Group. So this is where Heiko and I met. And for those of you that don't know C3UG, we, as a user group, made a decision a couple of years ago to transition from a in-person type of event to online interaction, primarily because, as we all know, the Notes and Domino community is shrinking, and we were having trouble getting people to show up. So we've, for now 2 years, been recording sessions, conversations, community updates and information, and posting them to our YouTube channel. So our latest video that just went up last week was with Richard Jeffs and Ufi. So you're encouraged to go to our YouTube channel and check it out. We're also active on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., etc., etc. So who am I? Graham Aker's been in the Notes and Domino world for, well, since 1992. Primarily application development. In fact, I would suggest 95% app dev these days, and have been through the whole XPages experience, right from, you know, classic Lotus script developer that never wrote a class in my life, to getting into server-side JavaScript, to eventually getting dragged into the Java world, to falling in love with the Java world, and we can blame the Mad Turk up here in row 2 for helping me there, and now embracing what's new in the world of Node.js. Also been on the board of OpenNTF this year, and being Canadian, I love hockey.
Yeah, well, stuff about me you can read up there. I would be more interested in you guys down there, so just for a quick show of hands of who already did something with the AppDev pack. Okay, yeah. Come on. Okay, so who did like a couple of things developing in Node.js? JavaScript, stuff like that, server-side JavaScript. Oh, not server-side JavaScript, but like full-stack JavaScript stuff. Okay, a couple of you. Okay, that's good to know. So yeah, a couple of things about me. I'm running 2 business partner shops, one in Germany, one in Canada, going back and forth all the time. So that's how I stumbled across those guys. I'm also like an old fart in the Nodes environment. I started also with 2.1 for my master's degrees, and then stuck with it, or it sticks to me, whatever you call it. And I think the rest is all good, so I don't have to spend too much time on myself. So what's more important, I think, from an overall perspective is what to talk about, Graham mentioned it, and what not to talk about today. Because we have an hour, which is awesome from Theo to give us that amount of time. But nevertheless, it's a little bit too little from our perspective to cover all the things that would be necessary to be covered in this session. So what do we talk about? Obviously, the stuff that we have on the slides, like the nerd stack. So all the basic stuff from for you need to interact with domino-db, Proton task, and something. We will talk a little bit about tooling, a little bit about security things that you might run into because you're now out in the wild. You're no longer using the Domino server as your main entrance point. So you might think about different concepts for that. We're also talking a bit, and we only briefly touch it, about things you have to consider in parts of development and deployment of these solutions, because also that differs from what you know from a Domino perspective. What we don't talk about, and we can do that having a drink later on, is, oh, I'm totally into Vue and whatnot, kind of framework discussions. You're happy to take that, but we've decided to go with the nerd stack for this, so bear with us now. If you don't like React, well, you have to go for that. Same goes for things like JavaScript data stores, how do they compare to Domino? We're Domino forever here, so we're talking about Domino today. We can talk about it a little bit like afterwards or outside about the philosophical disadvantages of those solutions, but for the sake of time, we don't do that. Same goes, and that's a bit of a downer for me, but we have been talking about this, and we decided to not have it in here. It's the OAuth part. So OAuth and IAM is something that would cover a complete session on its own. So we decided not to do that, to not like cramp everything in and not being able to go to a couple of things that we think we have to go down the path, and then leaving you with an incomplete picture. So that will be something that we will add on later on for this presentation, maybe in one of the next iterations, and also maybe with one of the next DevPack releases down the road. So,
does anybody know who that guy was?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
He is a Canadian reality TV star, home repair guy, and his shtick is he gets called in when things were built poorly, and his basic approach is rip it all out, throw it all out, and start again and do it right the first time, or the second time, I guess. So his name is Mike Holmes.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so why did we decide to go with the nerd stack, and what maybe makes you think of doing so? Those slides, you can argue about the values and whatnot about it. It's more, for me, it's more like a trending thing. So why would you take a look at this platform? And you can see from there that everything around Node is, from a supported kind of module perspective, simply exploding over the last couple of years. So the economy around this whole stack is literally exploding and growing fast over globally. So in contrast to us Domino people, this is where the fun starts, where the fun is. So for us, it might be a good idea to be part of this, and I think that's the great thing that we have with the App Dev Pack, to be part of this vibrant ecosystem that's all around Node, React, and also like JavaScript as a programming language for the full stack application development itself. So just to give you an impression why I think it's a good idea to really get your feet wet into this, because you got so much stuff that you can reuse, rebuild, so much tutorials, so much help out from a very vibrant community you won't find anyplace else, really. I can see from an HCL perspective why the App Dev Pack is a pretty cool step forward. I think it's, compared to all the other stacks that we have in Domino, and if you're a developer, you have your feet in one, two, or many more of those that are already available in the Nodes environment. But from an interface perspective, I think the App Dev Pack is, compared to like an XPages stack, is a very relatively small component to be maintained. And also it offers, like from a protocol aspect, like talking to gRPC, the Proton task, offers a lot of possibilities to open that up beyond the Node world into maybe Java or C# and whatnot, using the same kind of technology, and also giving you a modern way of communicating from an API perspective to your Domino server. So I think that's a pretty cool way to do that. And also from the nerd stack, again, it's just the community that's behind that makes this infrastructure or these environments so attractive for developers to go in there, from our perspective. So we talked about the nerd stack. What is it? We heard the acronym before. Node.js, Express, React, Domino-db. This transfers for us in our application landscape into the stack to the right, which is Node.js at the bottom as the runtime environment for a couple of those things. Express as a web server component on top of that. Domino-db, which interfaces, of course, then to the Domino database. We built on top of these three parts, we built our own REST API, and then we have a React frontend talking to this. So that's basically the architecture for the components that you'll see.
Okay, so what's all comprised here? We're going to show you an IBMA notes application. We built a question of the day app. So we're going to create the question. Actually, we have created the question, but we'll show you what it looks like. And that runs on the Domino server. Then we have, and the database application runs on the Domino server. Then, as Heiko mentioned, we've got actually two different APIs. The REST API that serves the front-end application, and then another back-end API that is going to show real-time data as we're all using the application here during the demo. We'll actually be able to see traffic going through to the web server. Obviously, front-end app that is the question of the day, and as I just mentioned, the real-time data. So those are the components that we've got as part of the demo. And I'm sorry to say that I only built one part of the demo. I built the front-end piece. It took me a hell of a long time. I learned a lot. As I said, I've got war wounds as a result of that. It was an excellent learning experience, and I'll have some feedback on that. So Heiko did the actual Domino application, the REST API, the back end, and the front end for the dashboard, and he's hosting it all on his server too. And something you didn't mention, actually, he's 2 years into his full stack node development experience life cycle. I'm right at the very beginning of it. So,
okay, so I think we'll just start off with the demo part. I'm going to show the basic nodes the nodes application. That's the base component. So where's my IDMA client? Here we go. Okay, I knew it. Great.
Caps lock?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Well, God's not with me today. Anyway, so that's
an issue that you can see the network.
as long as the Wi-Fi is stable. So that's basically the base application that you're looking at. The application is very simple. Then we have you can build surveys. We have one active survey right now, which is the survey that we're going to be filling out today, around here. And the simple notes form. You got a couple things in there, and you can add questions to it. So that's basically the whole thing that does. It also, you can also take the surveys using the nodes client, so that will be something as well, but that's pretty much a simple nodes after that. It's good.
Okay, get your phones out. We're going to scan a QR code, and we're going to try and bring down a server.
Yeah. So, the demo is live, so I would like to encourage you to go and share that. Let me just put one second. I'll bring it back up. If that comes back, I'll bring the code back up.
I'll do it.
And Graham's going to be walking around to let you scan it. The only thing what I want to do is that, and you see that already here. So this is the real-time part of the application. So, and you see the charts are rising now. So that's you guys logging into the server and doing API calls against the API that we've been doing, right? Okay, so I think we're pretty much through with that. And yeah, so just to giving you a little bit of an impression of what's possible with that stuff, which is not a big.
We had 100 sessions?
Yeah, we had a couple of people redoing it. So
cool.
And let's go back to the slides, which is right here. There we go. Okay, so thanks.
Yes, I know.
Did anybody have had problems with it? Is it not working? Okay, awesome.
You were all able to put in your vote, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so basically what you saw right there with the dashboard front end, there was a socket.io communication to the server as well. Built a quick React front end that was auto updating every time that a message came through that you guys did something with the API. I'll show you now.
Okay.
These are the building blocks of React.
So we'll start over here. Your phone hit an Nginx server, reverse proxy. It went to the survey app, but the dashboard app was also kind of on the front end. Then we've got the middleware pieces that are actually talking to the Domino database. This is all running on the Domino server. Not the Nginx piece, of course, but this stuff is all running on the Domino server. Do you have to do that? No, you don't. Okay? These pieces... I've done that? That's not the first time I've done that during a presentation. These pieces can run some other server, cloud service, put them wherever the hell you want. Doesn't matter, okay? Domino, obviously, we've got LDAP, which is, there is some actual authentication going on here, right? There is an expectation that when React is talking to the Domino server, there is some authentication. I actually hard-coded it just so I could make it work. So LDAP is working on the Domino server, and of course Proton, which we're all here to learn about. And of course, we've got the Notes client talking to the Domino server and the iPad talking to the Domino server. So that's the depth and breadth of the demo. As far as the Domino server goes, demo database, IDMA, LDAP, Proton, and it's actually listening for calls from the API. Is that the
Proton stuff?
Yeah, that's the Proton piece. So those are the bits there. Thank you. Next. That's you.
Okay, well, as Glenn mentioned, all of these parts, like the middleware, the middleware part that we've built, you can fan that out to literally to stage to any environment that's suitable for you. We have it running on the same machine here. The components are, we've built a REST API to handle the calls from the React application. And this is done by a couple of components that are mentioned here. And the real-time application itself has a server component as well, which is socket.io communication, just going back and forth. The REST API itself is, again, a socket.io client for the other part. Right?
I'm going to interrupt you quickly. Everybody's taking pictures. We're making these slides available.
Yeah, you can download those. Anyways, just to give you maybe a quick things and a glimpse of what this looks like from a code perspective, let me end the show here and try to head over to the code side of things. Let me actually start off with the API itself and a couple of things that we built into the API. So this tool here for who knows Postman? Okay, everybody. Oh, awesome.
Excellent.
Okay, so basically I used Postman to test my API, like most of you do, right? So what you see right here is the one of the actions that we have, like for the question of the day. This is the data we get back from Domino. We get passed in. We have the API is secured from a login perspective. So the React application authenticates once against the API. This is handled by doing an LDAP request to the Domino server and saying, okay, is that user allowed to use the API? And if yes, we transfer a token back, and this token gets passed by every subsequent API call that we're doing. We use JSON web tokens for that. So we only have to transfer like credentials once, and then we'll only validate the tokens.
And just so you know, I'm halfway building the front end app, and Heiko goes, "Hey, I put in this JWT authentication thing," and I went, "Okay." And he goes, "You just need to change this and this and this and this and this in your code and keep going." So that was one of those, okay, learn some more, let's keep going here.
Yeah. And as you see, we have like in our headers, in our, where's our auth? That's where we put the token in here. That's one of the tokens that we create, and these tokens actually do then get validated by the API, and if they're valid, then we execute the transaction. Because obviously it's not a good idea to have an open API on a productive server. You want to have something at least that blocks all those Russian geek factories trying to bring down your server, or the script kiddies that I wrote there. So that will help with that, at least a little bit. Okay, so if you do the request, then we get the data back. This is the data that you just saw, a couple of IDs, then a multiple choice question for the beers that we want to have, right? So that's basically the API itself. From a code perspective, let's switch over to the API first. This is this is actually the server.js code that I need to start up the API. So pretty simple, right? So there's only a couple of lines of code. We have to import a couple of components, or NPM components that we make use of, of course, Express for the web server part, Course, which you will run into, of course, and we heard about that for the upcoming app dev pack yesterday, that there will be help with that over time. Things like bundle parser and a couple of other components. Our individual code basically starts with where the line is currently right now. So all my API definitions, so what do my REST API definitions look like, is sorted out into a separate file, which is this survey routes component. Right? And if you take a look at that, it simply does a couple of things from the authentication point of view. For the LDAP stuff, you see that's the LDAP definition down here. We use a framework called Passport for that, which I think is awesome because it also brings, for example, things like support for connections, logins, both cloud and on-prem, and all the different authentication mechanisms for it. So take a look at this if you have the time. And then this, for example, right down here is this is just the validation of what's coming from the API. And this down here, like the app get, app post definitions, these are the actual roots for the API. Right? So that's where you have like the login API, the response stuff. And then we have a couple of things that we do whenever we hit those things, and then we have an implementation phase that actually does the actual code, which is the controller class that we're using. And this controller actually builds out, for example, the code to get the results for a question of the day. That's what we see here, and that's where we actually talk to Domino. That's where we go down the rabbit hole and talk to the Domino server, which actually does a select right here and comes back with a couple of results that we spit out to the API again. So a lot of things to go around that frame that all in, and as you see, the actual code to interact with Domino is relatively small, right? So you don't need that much code, and it's not like rocket science to build those things for a Domino perspective. It's more like getting all the bits and pieces together to puzzle up the whole application itself. I think that's the more cumbersome choice to go here. So that's a very quick overview of the API, just to give you an impression of that. This is the Socket.io server, which is an even smaller application. I handle my API call. So who's familiar with Socket.io? All of them. Okay. So Socket.io basically is a real-time communication component. Talks using the WebSocket standard. And basically we have a couple of options on how you can deal with those things. Here we have a so-called message-based communication in place, which is we have a server that opens up a channel, so to speak, and you can subscribe to that channel. And in that channel you can send in a message, and the server can take the message, intercept it, do something with it, and send it out to all the other listeners to the channel, basically. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So the API that we call like the API solution is a client to this, so it's subscribed to the channel, and whenever you guys hit one of the APIs, it sends a message to say, okay, this method got called, this method got called, this method got called. And then we have on the other side, we have the Socket.io client application that listens to that channel, takes the messages and receives a message we intercept those messages and do a little computation of the results for it, and then send out the results in a separate channel that the other application is using, and listens to it, takes the data and displays it into this chart that you've been seeing on the demo. So this is a separate part. You could integrate this into your main application as well. We decided to have this as a separate part so we can switch it on and off if you want to. So that's the I/O server, and I think for the sake of time I'll just switch back to the slides and let me go through the more highlighting stuff. Sure. So, quick overview of that. We saw the Postman stuff. Authentication, I mentioned that. We don't use the technical user stuff that's coming with Proton security. You're using SSL communication as of now. Part of the demo, that's what we're telling it from. We don't use the OAuth part right now. We will do that when we move on to the next iterations to have personalized data as well. But for the use case here, it was okay not to have the authentication. But as we all know, Domino is all about authentication, it's all about personalized data, and we will add this at a later time to this demo as well. Socket.io client, I mentioned that, so I think we can just skip on to the front-end application. Right.
So, for those of you who are sitting there right now panicking because everything that Heiko just said makes no sense whatsoever, I'm only about 4 months ahead of you.
That's just one, because I'm not a native speaker. So.
That's right, translating in German too. So, what, about 3 weeks ago, this wasn't working, and I was just dying, working weekends and evenings and trying to figure stuff out. And as it turned out, I had about 90% of the code working properly, and just needed a couple of tweaks and a couple of, here, Graham, come along over here, this is how this works, to actually get it working. So there were several people in the community that helped me, and I will say thank you to them, including Heiko, who helped me get this figured out. So in terms of the components for the front-end app that you use, built on React, uses Redux. Axios and Redux Thunk are two things to pay attention to. Those let you do the API call from your application and get the data back. Redux Form is something that I used based on the Udemy course that I took to learn all of this stuff in the first place. It's probably something that I wouldn't use again. That's some coaching that I've had from the community. And I used React Bootstrap. I got started, actually, the Udemy course that I was taking didn't use Bootstrap. It was using a different UI framework. And I was really struggling to try and understand the bits and pieces of that UI framework at the same time as trying to understand React, at the same time as trying to understand Redux and how memory was being managed and stuff like that. So I ultimately threw it away because based on my XPages experience, I understood how Bootstrap worked, so I could paint the UI and forget about it and move on. There's been a couple of other UI tools that have been recommended to me, and that's what I intend to learn next. But anyway, that's the components of the survey app.
The web app, the dashboard web app is just also a simple React application. As I mentioned, it uses Socket.io client, and also I just took a peek on around the community what kind of charting component is coming in handy to display this. So very basic stuff. So like I think it's like one main component for those guys who know React, and one child component. I didn't use Redux for that because it was just like way over top to do that. So I'm just like inheriting data down to the components from the basic React state objects that we're using inside of React. Very simple application for that as well.
And based on the fact that you've got 2 years worth of full stack development experience, how long did it take to build that?
That? 2 hours.
Okay, so we'll eventually get to the point where this stuff is a lot easier than, at least for me, I'm hoping I get to the point where it's a lot
but
easier.
it's limited functionality from that perspective. I think
Fair.
that's more the case to that. So anyways. Okay. So after going through all that, what did we get that we didn't have before now from a Domino developer perspective? And I think there's one thing that's really sticks out to me. If you use these tools in the way they're intended, you will get a much more clearly structured application in your application environment that you're having, right? If you're building out your APIs correctly, if you're separating out your front ends, and you also, to some extent, encapsulate the components that talk to your data store, you gain a lot of flexibility in your whole infrastructure components. So you can exchange all of these components back and forth and even change technologies without breaking the other parts. I think that's a big difference from everything that we see inside Domino so far, because every other component we have been using, besides you could use a lot of those things, like you could build React front ends talking to Java, REST APIs on Domino, of course, as well. But if you look at things like XPages or something, you're always relying on the Domino server, not only from a data perspective, but also from delivering front-end components and whatnot. So with that, you're clearly separating things out. So if React is no longer the choice of your application front-end, you just throw it away, rebuild it in Vue or whatever you have, and you don't have to touch the other pieces of the puzzle. Same goes for the API. If you want to extend the API, maybe move it to Java, whatever you can. As long as you stick to the RESTful principles here, you're pretty much fine, right? And sadly enough, if you want to exchange for whatever reason the data store behind that, that's also a very nimble little piece to, say, put Mongo in there, if for whatever reason you might want to do this, right? You don't break the front-end applications, you don't break big parts of the middleware stack, it's only a very small and tiny piece to be replaced. So that's a gain that we, I think, get from that. And as we try to illustrate with this Socket.io application, which is a very basic thing, so not really something, but I think we gain a lot more opportunities here to build applications. A lot of stuff that we could do in Domino, and there are always ways to do that. And you always were able to muddle things in there to some extent to make it work, which is one of the great things that I like about Domino. Here we have a huge, vast open door to do a lot of stuff that we always wanted to do, but it was always a struggle to do it. And here we have a lot more support and a lot more opportunity to build new and creative apps in that. What do we give up on that? Literally nothing. So as the Notes app on the iPad shows you, that stuff plays nicely with it. So Domino and the app dev pack make this world a good citizen in this new Node.js, whatever kind of environment, right? And you don't give up on all the things that you maybe loved and know. So you can still use them and they're still useful to a large extent. But the flexibility that you get to open up your application development environment, like things like PWAs that go on top of that, like Electron-based apps and all those kind of things, that's all something that's way easier using a stack like this compared to what we have in Domino, from my perspective. Okay, what tooling actually do you need? Do you want to take that, Ray?
Sure. Actually, I was going to say, I'm going to guess that more than one of you looked at that demo app and said, I could build that in XPages. And the answer is absolutely, you can. So again, it's not that matter of saying that this is wildly different from what we had before. It's not. But again, as Heiko said, it opens that door to other things that we can do. So what tools do you need? Well, obviously, Notes Domino, Domino Designer, and the App Dev Pack. And for those that don't know, you do need to install the App Dev Pack separately after you install Domino. Node.js and Express. Everybody understands Express. Express is a web server. So you install Express. Going back to that slide that showed everything sitting on the Domino server, the web components of the demo app outside of Domino were not running on Domino. They were running on the same physical hardware, but Express is the web server that those applications run on. Hopefully trying not to confuse things there. Visual Studio Code, that was what Heiko was using to show the application development. If you haven't touched Visual Studio Code, download it, install it, start learning it. It is really cool. Really, really cool. I went to a JavaScript conference in Vancouver a couple of years ago. There was a guy from Microsoft who had some code that included a bunch of different modules. And he went to his hard drive and deleted the folders with those modules in them, physically deleted them from the hard drive, opened up Visual Studio Code. It checked his includes and automatically downloaded all of those things that he had just deleted for him. So Visual Studio Code does so many amazing things, and it's really a fun environment to get used to. Postman, we already talked about. Redux DevTools is something that I started to use. It's an important thing to keep in mind as you get into Redux. Redux is the thing that sits in your application that keeps track of what's in memory. So as you call an API and get some data back, Redux is the thing that you use to manage those bits and pieces of data that you have in memory. Redux DevTools installs in Chrome and gives you a window into that memory because you can't see it otherwise unless you paint the screen and do some stuff. So it's something that is a very useful tool. In fact, it's really cool because as you click a button, refresh a screen, pull in some more data, Redux DevTools gives you the ability to step back in those clicks and see what memory looked like in those different moments. So it's a really fun little tool. The DevTools in the browsers, I think we're all somewhat familiar with, but you'll get more familiar with them as you get into JavaScript. And of course, GitHub. I think everybody here has heard of GitHub. If you don't have a GitHub account, it's time to get a GitHub account. All of the code that we use to build this app is going to be available for free from us on our C3UG GitHub repo. So GitHub is something that we all, if we haven't got into yet, it's time to get into it. Okay, lessons learned. Here's my bruises. React. I thought React was what you used to build the UI, and it's not. React is what you use to build the application. And you can use a different library, whatever library you want, to paint the UI. But you're putting business logic into your front end. Obviously, there's business logic in the API, but you can have business logic in your front end as well. As I said, I ultimately ended up using Bootstrap. You don't have to use Bootstrap. And in fact, one of the bugs that's in the app is a result of using React Bootstrap. and Redux formed, they managed to crash into each other. So in that particular case, don't just think that you're painting the UI with React, because you're not. You're building an application with React and painting the UI inside of it. You'll rebuild your app multiple times. I think this is true of anything. You know, if I think back to the very first XPages app that I built, or even the very first Notes app that I built, right? We all get better with time. So be comfortable with making mistakes, and it's really just coming from my heart and how desperate I was 3 weeks ago to just make the damn thing work, and ultimately cut a couple of corners.
Well, I think you have to add a little bit to that, because React is really you can do things in React in a certain way, but there's a couple of diversions you might take. So, and as soon as you, for example, if you look for the Redux thing that you put in was one of those. Yeah. So basically, React gives you, for example, an own method of handling state of your application, so data that you pass back and forth between components. If you use that way, you build the application in one specific way. If for whatever reason you bump into a wall and say, okay, I need something else that helps me along, because from a feature and function perspective, all of a sudden something shows up and I need things like Redux in there. This totally breaks your application, because then all the nifty part of data transformation that you have done might be obsolete now. So that's why you have to redo a couple things. It's not like on your own fault. It might be just that you run into a roadblock with a specific way of doing things. And as soon as you revert those, you technically, or in the end, to some extent, rewrite your code. So be aware of that. You can take the wrong turn, and if you take the wrong turn for too long, you will be rebuilding things. Not that it's overly complicated, but you have to come up with a different logic and a different way of handling things. So.
The last bullet for me there is what we were told when we learned XPages is true. What I mean by that is, you know, if you think about when XPages came along and everybody was encouraging us to go and learn XPages, and in many cases how difficult it was, the argument at the time was that we're learning more standard web development practices and methodologies and ways of going about things, and that's true. Those things translate into this new world as well. So feel comfortable that for those of you that have pushed far into XPages and are like, oh God, I got to learn another thing, there are lots of things that I learned with XPages that transition over quite nicely.
Okay. So quick show of hands again, who has built REST APIs with Domino? With whatever tool set. So a couple of you. Okay. Well then, you know that RESTful principle stuff already, so I don't have to talk about this. Stick to that. I encourage you for your first implementation, if you do it like with a stack like this, build the REST API by hand. Don't use like Swagger for the first time or OpenAPI. They help you along, but if something breaks along the way, it will take you probably a couple of hours, days, whatever kind of time frame to figure out what went wrong with that. So start small, helps along the way, and build the code by hand so you know what's happening for the first time. No offense against those frameworks, they're doing a great job, especially if you want to deal with databases and more model-driven ways of building your applications. But like for getting your feet wet, they might be a bit oversized. And then there's a big elephant in the room, and that's the last bullet point from my perspective. It comes in very small, like Webpack, and what's Webpack, right? If you're looking at the deployment part of things of this whole show, this is where it starts to get ugly from a Domino developer's perspective, right? I mean, if you're a Domino guy, hey, we have an NTF, we just dunk it on the server, we just put an instance up, and hey, we're up and running. Forget about that to get in production, right? You now play with the big guys. And the big guys, they have things like repositories, they have things like continuous deliveries, things and whatnot that you can all have to or can't integrate to. And that, for example, makes building your application a whole different beast than it is with Domino. And the thing to do that is Webpack to a certain extent from the Node perspective. And a couple of these frameworks like Create React App help you along the way to get your feet wet by taking a lot of the complexity of a building process for the application out of it. You will run into roadblocks there as well down the road. And sooner or later, as long as when you start your first big project, you will run into Webpack and into all these other packaging deployment tools that are out there. So you better start learning those as well. The good thing about this is it's not like in the Domino community where you're the single one that uses them in your organization. Probably everything else is already in place for you because all other platforms in the world are using the same tools. So just look around in your organization, you will find somebody who's fluent in Maven, who might be fluent in Jenkins, who might be fluent in all of these deployment tools, and even in Webpack probably, because you might not be the only one doing node applications in your organization. So that's also, again, a good thing because we're no longer alone. We're just part of the rest of the world, right? So and that's, I think, is a good thing. So you get help with that along the way as well. A couple of other resources that we even use in Graham mentioned Axios already. Passport, I mentioned that as a library for node applications because it helps you along with authentication against heterogeneous systems. I think there's about 500 endpoints, authentication endpoints and Passport supports by default, including stuff like Connections Cloud and whatnot. I mentioned that. Express Validator is a component that helps you at least to validate the data that you're getting back from your API calls, right? If our application sends back data to the API, we should validate it, obviously. So if you did you get the right amount of attributes in the JSON object that we're getting back? Is it the right data type and all those kind of things? You can do that with Express Validator, so that's a good thing as well. FortUI is a small library to create random numbers, basically. So we use that a lot. Lodash. Whenever you do React and Redux and stuff like that, you stumble upon Lodash because Lodash helps you in a lot of areas like mapping through data areas and manipulating data sets that you might be iterating through. Course, as I mentioned as well, Course is something to help you along. The Course components are there to help you along with multi-domain crossing things in the browser. So if you run into problems with cross-browser or what's it called?
Cross-domain.
Yeah.
Cross-origin domain.
Yeah. So that will help you along with that. And on the long term, you definitely want to look into things like OpenAPI and Swagger to help you along with building new APIs and maintaining them, and go to from an API perspective more to a model-driven asset to that's coming in handy as well. We got some people there as well that might help you along the way if you run into them or follow them or whatever, and getting their feedback with that as well. You see us there, of course, as well, so we'll try to blog and brag about
Oliver's done some blogging.
Oliver's done a couple of those, has done a great thing, a great amount of stuff in that one and the other one as well. I want to point out one guy that I particularly like, is Stefan Greiber at the end. He's not within our community. He's a professional Udemy course guy, and he did, I think, an awesome job in creating React development Udemy courses that really take you step by step along the way on how to build a React application from scratch, and really taking the steps to let you digest those things and then add complexity to it. So if you want to get your feedback with that, you want to get comfortable with all those kind of things, take a look at Udemy and look for him. He's got not only React, he does like everything that's Java full stack, but the React stuff in person, I think, especially, I like a lot.
Yeah, so other resources, it's not actually posted up there yet, but we are going to have on the C3UG GitHub repo this code. Give us a couple of days to get that up there. We've been talking about Udemy. Does everybody know Udemy? Anybody not know Udemy? Udemy is a place to go at udemy.com. Basically, you can learn photography, you can learn painting, you can learn whatever. But basically, for like $20, $15 or more, whatever, you can learn anything. Just do a quick Google search in there, search within the Udemy, and you'll find anything that you want to do. And so the Stephen Grider course on Udemy is the thing that I used to learn how to do all of this stuff. Very extensive, like 50 hours worth of videos in this one particular course. It's fantastic.
I just recently upgraded to the latest and greatest in React and Node and whatnot, so this is a very, very accurate guy. He's really taking care of it.
I think everybody knows Stack Overflow. We're announcing today C3UG is doing a video series on exactly this subject. So how did we build all these bits and pieces? How do you install the app dev pack? I think we'll probably have a component on IAM. We may have a component on... Huh?
Yeah.
Don't make those promises? Okay. But that's coming. Basically, when we get back from Engage, we're going to start recording videos And then OpenNTF, of course. Does everybody know about OpenNTF Slack channel? Very, very important to get in on the Slack channel on OpenNTF, because there's a specific channel for Domino Node.js conversation, and there's also, I'm talking about the guides piece of that. So in terms of how-to guides, one of my roles within OpenNTF is to lead the community to creating documentation that we're going to use to help each other. So we also have a guides channel. Anybody that's interested in being a part of that, just let me know. We're actually doing a how to install the app dev pack step-by-step screenshot type thing, and also Domino on Docker. So that's coming soon.
I
think that's it.
That's
Time for
conclusive.
questions.
Oh yeah, and by the way, we got a couple of T-shirts over here, like 3 of them, like these nice C3G ones. If you want to get one of those, just fire up some questions. We will decide by the end of what's the best question, and the top 3 from our top of mind will then have the ability to grab a T-shirt or not. But then with that, I think we'll open it up. Thank you for staying with us tonight.
What can we answer? Yes?
So, from my understanding is that right now the app dev has no possibility to session-based authentication against Domino. So, reader fields and author fields. Is there any idea how to get around that?
That's not completely true.
Yeah.
The true part is that you can't use it with the domino-db Node.js package right now. But you can use Domino Access Services authenticated. Come to our session at 2:45 to find out.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good recommendation. So we have there's another session coming up. Oliver was doing that, and so you might sit into this as well, because they might cover a different angle than we did. So based on that. But
Dan announced yesterday in his session that the next release of the app dev pack is going to support author and reader fields, along with a bunch more security, which is almost ready to drop, right? Almost ready.
Which text?
Yes?
I just have an addition there on Redux. Sometimes it makes it more complicated in some cases, depending on what you do, but it's really nice, like, what you could do is that you could have a button on the interface for the user to submit, like, when something goes wrong, and it sends the Redux history together with that issue.
Yeah.
So you can take that and you can replay exactly what the user did when it broke down.
Yeah.
That's cool.
that's cool too. Yeah.
Like exactly
I
what I clicked and what happened. And,
I like Redux a lot. It takes a while to wrap your head around it, but I really like it.
So the idea is not to use Redux or to use Redux. What's better? Because, in your opinion,
To compare to what?
you should use Redux or not? Because people.
It depends. You can. There's not a simple answer to that. I mean, the React stuff alone that helps you maintain state and data within your components is somewhat limited, right? So it might be for small implementations, it might be sufficient to use that, because Redux is a totally different beast. And what took me a while within my first year was to have applications that use both mechanisms, right? I went to a customer, the first React application that I was looking in was using 2 different state objects at the same time, like the React state and Redux, and like messing it all up. So there's always it's a functional decision whether Redux adds value to your application or not. It probably does. It makes sense to look at it from my perspective, because everything that you want to keep, if you want to maintain state about multiple pages inside of your application, it's a lot easier to do that with Redux than it is to the DOM-based or DOM-bound state mechanism that React itself gives you. So from that perspective, they naturally fit each other to a certain degree. So from that perspective, you could be fine using the React methodology, but if your application's growing, you'll definitely might consider doing otherwise. So from that perspective, that's why we decided to say, okay, we go down the Redux rabbit hole right from the beginning, because whenever we want to extend this thing, we definitely run into a roadblock. We can definitely tell that already, even though for that particular incarnation of the application, we could have done with the Redux state methodology just fine for now.
The intention is not to say don't learn Redux.
Yes.
Learn Redux. But learning Redux is a challenge. You will absolutely cross paths with Redux in a full stack web development environment. So yes.
It adds a couple of layers of complexity to a different way of building front-end applications. If you never get the feedback with React, React handles all your front-end components differently than things that you did in XPages, for example. So you have different ways of building those things, and React just adds a couple of complexity layers on top of Redux adds a couple of more bars to take that hurdle. But it's worth it, definitely, because you definitely will run into these problems that Redux will solve for you over time. So I'm definitely encouraging you to take a look at it.
The Stephen Grider Udemy course probably went 30 hours on React before it introduced Redux, and I very much recommend taking that course. Yeah.
But it basically isn't it like it's immutable, that you never change any data, you make a new copy and you change copy of data.
Don't complicate things.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a good thing.
That's exactly. But and this also is like a concept that you have to get used to. You have to copy the data, you intercept the data, and then you bring back the data as a new object, because only then React says, okay, oh yeah, my data has changed, so I have to redraw my interface. Right? So all of these kind of concepts, that's what you have to digest coming from an XPages front-end development, maybe. Right, so there's a couple of concepts that you have to wrap your head around. And if you got them, then I think it's pretty obvious why those things work as they do. But it takes a while to digest it. It's not undoable, but it takes a while to digest.
I think we got a couple more questions.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we use XPages is because it's easy to work with rich text fields, especially when people are still using the notes line as well. Is there a way to handle this with these new possibilities?
I'm going to let the guy at the end of your row answer that question. So, sorry, just quickly, for anybody that doesn't know, this is Dan Dumont from HCL, who's here to critique our presentation and see if we're using his tools the right way.
You can always iframe it in the next page.
Yeah, so specifically in the app dev pack with respect to rich text.
Yeah. Other questions?
We're still trying to figure out how we want to handle it.
Yeah, so that's not there yet, but it's coming.
And that's something for OpenF to make a React component to this iframes for XPages.
I'll wait for Dan to fix it for me. Tell you the truth.
Yes, sir.
So one thing that bothers me with this new model is for years we had this problem of distribution of the software from development to test to production. So this becomes quite easier with Node.js world, where there are very good tools for that, test-driven development tools, etc., etc. But still, it might be an issue to simultaneously distribute the same thing, because we have an NSF right now. Maybe we have additional RESTful services inside the NSF, so we have to distribute them in parallel to this process. So is there any way, did you look for any way to make it simultaneous, make it helping each other? I don't know, because we were trying this in Maven, for instance. There has been some solutions to them, Maven kicking out the replication process from NSF, etc. So that might be a problem.
It is, absolutely. And
Just on the table,
that's a very good question. And I think that's something that we definitely have to align. And then I can tell from my own experience, I have 2 customer installations where we have Maven and Jenkins deployments being done, including nodes templates that go along with the release of a Node.js middleware and a React frontend. And boy, I tell you, That was fun.
Yeah. Okay, good.
So this took us all to get this up in production, and it's a bank, of course, so they have like development, then they have a Q&A environment, and they have a pre-production environment, and then they go to production. So 4 stages, and it took like I would say 40% of the project time and efforts to build the integrated deployment stack to get this up and running. The good thing is you build it once, and if nothing, especially on the designer side of things, breaks, you're done for the next project, right? You build it once and you're good to go. But given the fact that there's a couple of gazillion of deployment tools out there that might not work with headless designer and whatnot you have had to use at that point in time, that's an issue and a struggle, and that's something that definitely has to be addressed better, especially for the NTF part. So a couple of the old issues that we carry around as legacy for decades now, like the NSF part of the show not being a nice citizen for code distribution systems outside of the Domino world, is still an issue here and still needs to be addressed and fixed from my perspective.
All right, we're keeping you from lunch. We've got maybe time for one more question. Yes?
Normally I came from Domino development and XPages, so we used to have like a visual, remember, like just programming a form,
Yeah.
it was done.
Yeah.
The design was fine, you could see the design, then at XPages, start off, right?
Yep.
And now when I see React and all this node development, there's no really, you have a ton of drag and drop options, and then you get confused because it's...
Get a good keyboard instead.
Yeah.
Type everything.
Did you get used to the source pane in Domino Designer?
So the source? Yeah.
Source? Yeah. You're fine.
There's a couple of front-end modeling tools for React or for other stuff as well, but those also, they generate code,
Yeah.
and it takes you to a certain level, but then you have to be able to go through that code and check out all the stuff that's not working for your special implementation. So they might help you in making your screens, but I'm not sure if they're really helpful at all. So I don't see them as a value add in that from my perspective. So there is tooling for that, but the results that those generators are spitting out currently, we talked about those rewriting your applications. That's what you probably end up doing with that stuff that's coming out of there. So why spend the time?
All right, anybody has any more questions, feel free to come up. Otherwise, thank you all for spending your time with us today, and enjoy the rest of the night.